You're watching the Hostile Takeover podcast.
Can I swear?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I had what I called fuck delegation when I was working in live band stuff, because I had to let go of some fucks, because if I got too stressed about things being not on time or things not being absolutely perfect, I'm expending too many fucks in the wrong area, and then I don't have enough fucks for later. So it was fuck delegation for me. And I sort of had to let go of a lot of that, like, neuroses, and then be on time. So yeah, I'm really shocked that I didn't get into theater earlier, because theater is very precise and very clean and detail oriented and very much on time.
Absolutely.
So I am enjoying that.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's great to see you. It really is. It's been a long time.
Way too long.
I love your background. It's like a magical forest.
Yeah, my magical forest of a nursery.
So, I'm super glad to have you on the podcast. I've known you longer than we've been colleagues. We've been friends for a very long time. But I've always been impressed by your passion for what you do, and your constant evolving of your skills, and like where I met you when you were in the industry, and like where you are now, and you've like just always been on this like upwards trajectory of what you're doing, and it's impressive to watch, and I'm super proud of you, and I hope to see you keep on that path.
Thank you. Yeah, you too. It was fantastic going from meeting you as friends and then suddenly seeing you thrust into these amazing projects. I'm like, Jake did that. Awesome.
Yeah, it's really nice to see your friends succeed.
Yeah.
So let's get into you. I want to chat with you. Talk about maybe where you started in the industry for everyone else, and maybe just give us a little quick, like, how you got into the industry and what drew you to it.
Yeah. So I started out, I figured out I wanted to get into sound when I was quite young, because my parents very much were trying to get me to start picking a career path when I was 12, before I got into high school, so that I can pick the right high school courses to get into the right colleges. So my little 12-year-old brain was like, well, I'm really good with tech stuff, and I really like music, and like I know that the likelihood of me making it as a famous musician is very slim. I know that's very hard to do. So my kid brain was like, I'm going to put the two together and just be a sound tech. But I thought I was going to get into recording engineering, because I wanted to make records. Mm-hmm. I went to Harris Institute in Toronto when I was 18, and very quickly realized that I wanted to get into live sound. So when I graduated, sort of at the peak of the recession in 2008, 2009, and it was really hard to find gigs back then. So I volunteered for a very long time. Gradually started picking up gigs here and there, small gigs. Started working for Westbury in 2010. And a lot of it was just sort of stagehand gigs and small audio gigs. And then I started getting larger and larger venues, larger and larger production audio gigs. And then pre-pandemic, I was working as the technical director for the Mod Club at primarily doing monitor engineering, which is what I prefer to do. I did front of house for many years before finding monitor engineering, and that's what I prefer. It's what works well for my brain. So now post-pandemic, post-pandemic, which was a big shift, I've just started taking calls as a permit worker with Local 58, which has been a sort of a pleasant surprise. It was very much not what I was expecting. And now I'm working as an A2 at the Princess of Wales for Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is a very big switch going from mixing monitors for rock bands to doing theater. But I am enjoying it.
Really cool. You touched on a few things that I have written down here that I wanted to chat with you about. But let's start at the beginning. you mentioned volunteering.
Mm.
That's how I actually got my start in the industry as well. I was kind of doing some studio in my high school. There was a tech program, and I was lucky enough to get into the audio engineering part of it.
Nice.
So, I got to mess around in the studio, and, I got to stay after school and work in the studio and bring in bands. And that was super cool. But then, like, my first volunteer gig was for the teacher, and it was for like a local theater production company. And then, like, that just totally got the ball rolling. Like, I met my first mentor, Mo Gauthier, who was the TD at the theater. And that just that started everything for me. So how did you get into volunteering? And do you feel that the amount of volunteering you did kind of like helped you, or do you feel like it was like kind of like a hole in the industry that like people rely on a lot of volunteer work and stuff?
I think at the time it was a bit of an oversaturated market. I mean, there certainly was a lot of graduates coming out of these small private colleges that were pumping out audio engineers of various kinds. So I felt like it was a bit of an oversaturated market. There weren't a lot of positions available, and I really didn't have much experience at the time. When I say I was new, I mean I had never done a gig before, sort of thing. So I was very much the squeaky wheel. Like when I was in school, I was bugging instructors or colleagues of my instructors to just go out and watch them mix a show, like not even do anything else other than just absorb information. So I did a lot of that, and then I just sort of put myself out there being like, hey, I want gig experience. I will work for free for a couple of gigs just to like learn how a show is set up. And that's just that's how I approached it personally, to try and sort of bump up my skill level so that I was more hireable, like so that I was more qualified to take on a job. And I very much encourage folks to do that while they're in school, although I
Yes.
feel like the industry is very much at a place where we are very hungry for new technicians, and that nobody should be working for free at this point.
Yeah. It's when you work, you should be getting paid. That's
Absolutely.
I full-heartedly agree with that.
Mhm.
So yeah, and then so you were in the clubs and doing a lot of music stuff, and
Mhm.
and now recently with IATSE, Local 58, and in theater.
Mhm.
Um, what from the music industry have you brought over into theater? Because it's a very different, just a vibe altogether.
Oh,
Just the people who work in theater versus the people who work in music. There's some overlap, but it tends to be just a very different world of like the vibe, the way that people talk to each other, and
yeah.
uh, what have you brought over, and how have those two skills come in for you, and how do you navigate that?
It's really funny, since getting into theater, I sort of had this little light bulb moment where I was like, I don't know how I didn't land in theater earlier, honestly, because if you know me, especially if you know like me at home, I'm a very neurotic person and a very detail oriented person. I also very much love when things run on time, and if you work with rock shows, you know that is
Yeah,
not at
yeah,
all what that is like. So I sort of, can I swear?
yeah, for sure, yeah.
Okay. So I had what I called fuck delegation when I was working in live band stuff, because I had to let go of some fucks, because if I got too stressed about things being not on time or things not being absolutely perfect, I'm expending too many fucks in the wrong area, and then I don't have enough fucks for later. So it was fuck delegation for me. And I sort of had to let go of a lot of that like neuroses, and then be on time. So yeah, I'm really shocked that I didn't get into theater earlier, because theater is very precise and very clean and detail oriented and very much on time. So I am
Absolutely.
enjoying that sort of aspect of it. Uh, it's also interesting because, like, I'm not sure if you've experienced this. Depending on what type of show you're working, you're very much like a social chameleon in a way as a technician, especially if
Yes.
you're working one-on-one with bands. So like one day I would have a jazz artist, the next day I would have a metal band, and the way I communicate with those people is entirely different. Same thing if you have a corporate client, like you sort of approach it socially in a very different way. So I feel like it's very easy for me to just sort of learn how folks are operating and what sort of language they're using and what they're comfortable with. So being a bit of a chameleon did help the transition to theater. Yeah, it's still very social. It's still very it still has that sort of like on the edge of your seat. You need to very much be on the ball because it can be stressful or something can go wrong at any given moment. So it still has that intensity and that vibe, but it is a bit more controlled, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Starting in theater, and then I did theater for a brief stint kind of in the middle of my career. But the rest of it was mainly in music and different sorts of, I guess, like corporate, you'd call it. Not like corporate, like ballroom stuff, but corporate, like, like the Pan Am Games, for instance. Like I would call that corporate shows and corporate events. So coming from theater, I used to do RF, which is like all like the wireless microphones for I'm just explaining this to everyone else. So like the wireless microphones that the actors would wear on stage. So I would have to like go into like women's dressing rooms, often while they're dressing, and put on a microphone. So like you said, being a chameleon really kind of helps in those situations where like the way I talk and act when I'm in that situation in a women's dressing room is like much different than the way I act when I'm like a stage manager or a production manager and like talking to a bunch of like roadies and crew. Like it's like it's like very, very different. Like I was chatting with Guillermo Sabas yesterday, and we kind of touched on this like a little bit about like touring and like different. He mentioned that like in Peru, just like the whole vibe was just different, and like the way people worked was like a little bit slower and not as on time as like working in like Toronto and North America. So yeah, it's interesting you bring up like being a chameleon, because I feel that's like really important to be able to like, because there's so many different personalities in the just even in the music industry, like talking with an artist or talking with like a manager are just hugely different experiences, especially like talking to an artist like pre-show and talking to an artist post-show, because those like it's just different the way they're nervous or they're so yeah, it's very important, and that's a great point you made about being a chameleon.
Yeah, it's funny. I've often talked a lot about how the emotional and social aspect, when you're getting into sound, when you're new, you don't really think about how important that aspect is, but I think it's almost as important or more important than your technical skills. Like being able to read other people's emotions and handle other people's emotions as well as your own, obviously.
Yeah.
But having that aspect and having the social aspect down was definitely a learned skill for me. I came into this industry very socially awkward and very clumsy in that regard. And I very much have been learning those skills as I've been going along.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I kind of feel like it was like it was a learned skill for me was doing that. And I did put actually a lot of effort into it, because I tend not to be like an overly social person. Like I kind of keep my friends group kind of close. So like at work, when I have to be talking to like like hundreds of people at a time, sometimes on big shows, that like I had to really work on like how to do that and how to speak in front of people, and just so you said something that was really interesting, and I'm just trying to remember what it was. I can't remember, so I'm just going to move on, and maybe I'll remember it when we move on. So, you've been an audio engineer and mainly a monitor engineer. So, a lot of people kind of are drawn to front of house and like mixing bands and stuff, and having that full spectrum of what's happening on stage. What gravitated you to monitors? Because I know I've asked you this question before and we've talked about it, but I just want you to explain, because I really like how you explain all of this. What do you enjoy about doing monitors, and what have you what are the main differences between doing front of house and monitors, and why do you like monitors over FOH?
I think honestly the biggest reason I like monitors over front of house is the fantastic combination of neurodivergency that exists in my brain. I have pretty decent ADHD, as well as a myriad of other things. And so for me, the emotional aspect is great. Like I very much feel connected to the band. I read people's body language. I can watch when someone is vibing with someone, and then you can see their body language shift, and you notice they're not grooving out anymore, and they're sort of watching what chords someone else is playing. You're like, oh, okay, that person's struggling to hear that. I'm gonna just like nudge that up just a hair, and you see them get back into it, and you sort of feed off of that energy. And that I think is the most rewarding part of it. I think that's super cool. I'm very much about the user experience of it, so putting myself in someone else's sort of shoes and trying to build that experience for them as to what they're trying to achieve on stage. I can get into the in-ears aspect of that later. That's a whole other tangent. But I think in terms of the ADHD component of it, my brain really does enjoy switching from different mixes. It's like this mix, that mix, this mix, that mix. And that works very well for my brain. But yeah, I think the amount of dopamine and sort of reward that I get from that, not just from like the cheering of the audience, but the satisfaction of the band members that I'm working with, really does help motivate me to just keep building and keep doing better. But yeah, it's an entirely different technical approach than doing front of house, and it's something that just
absolutely,
yeah.
I always enjoyed doing monitors myself. I found it just fun to like you kind of like just the way you feel about your participation and things is just a little, it's just different, and it's just a different kind of reward, like being able to like almost like directly help the individual band members as opposed to like the show as a whole.
Yeah, it is very much a more personal experience, and it's neat because you get to see a lot of the inside jokes and little things that the audience doesn't sort of necessarily pick up on, and it's neat feeling a bit of that experience and that team while on stage with them.
Yeah, and like personality wise as well. Like I there's just, you need a different personality to be a good monitor engineer. Like front of house, you're kind of isolated a little bit, and you're like kind of on your own. But you're working with a lot more people when you're mixing monitors.
I've always said that monitors is more of a customer service position. You're sort of there to please other people, to give them what they want. It's very much a customer service role.
So I wanted to talk to you about coming up in the clubs in Toronto and stuff. I know you worked at the Mod Club, and that closed during COVID, unfortunately. But can you give us a little bit of information about your experience working in the clubs and what you enjoyed about doing that? And
yeah, I mean, for me personally, I think the club scene, I'm gonna turn off my alarm, sorry about that. Start over. Yeah, my experience in the club scene I feel was really good for me while I was in my 20s. I don't necessarily, especially as a parent now, like I don't know that it's something I would necessarily want now. But I think it was a great growing environment for me. I got to start out really small and sort of work my way up through the clubs. As a person with a full-on anxiety disorder, I am sort of impressed with how much I was able to sort of manage my anxiety because of working in the club scene, because it is a sort of haphazard, stressful environment to work in rather. That being said, when I started in the industry, I was 18 years old and I had long blonde hair and was quite trusting and naive. So the sort of being at the time I identified as female. So I'll talk a bit about my experience as a female tech. Um, my experience as a female tech was quite rough when I started, and very nearly quit the industry because of it. So I definitely developed a thick skin because of some of the stuff that I went through when I was younger. And I think that thick skin has very much still carried over into the rest of my life. It's something I'm trying to sort of shed a little bit because it has toughened me in a way. Yeah.
I have a bunch of questions about all of this. You mentioned like developing a thick skin.
Mhm.
Do, do you, I guess it's kind of a double-edged sword, maybe. Like, do
Mhm.
you like? Cause it's important to have tough skin and kind of like let things roll off. And like you said, like I think that's hilarious. What was it? Your fuck meter or something? Or
Yeah, my fuck
your fuck
delegation.
delegation. So like
Yeah.
like you got to kind of develop thick skin about things and like let certain things roll off and everything. But when you develop a thick skin and you lose some vulnerability.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you
Yeah.
do you feel like you've been able to become more vulnerable, and like is that what you meant by shedding some of the thick skin?
Yeah, it's something that I've been slowly working on, but I don't think I'm sort of back to where I used to be. I think when you met me when I was still very much in my early 20s, I was still very like vulnerable in a way. I was very open and sort of I had a big heart, and I think I sort of was very like very much an open book sort of thing. And I feel like over the years, as I sort of progressed into larger gigs and more responsibility at work, I definitely noticed that I had to sort of close myself off a little bit because the impact of other people's emotions on me was just too much, or like what was being thrown at me was just too much. So I very much like it was almost I call it like an emotional callus, that thick skin, and
Hmm.
keep rubbing away at that thing, it's going to keep getting thicker. And I found that it was starting to bleed into my personal life, where I'm noticing that like I'm more closed off emotionally outside of work. So that's certainly been some undoing throughout the pandemic, but I think that it's sort of impacted me in a very long term and potentially even permanent way. Yeah.
So coming up in the industry, um, you know, everybody knows that the industry is very male dominated.
Mm.
Like I was reading some articles to research this because I wanted to talk with you a little bit about it, and the numbers I found were like were really staggering. Like you look at them if you, from an outsider looking in on the industry, you you see almost not almost I don't want to tread on this lightly because it's a very sensitive topic, but on the outside looking in, if you're not in the industry and haven't researched it, it almost looks like equal representation.
Mm.
Like if you look at like Billboard artists, right? You have like
Yeah.
women at the top, and like there's males on the top, and there's people of color and all sorts of different representations. But as you go deeper into the industry and you look at things like producers, technicians, writers, those numbers drop drastically. Like I think like music producers and women, it's always been under 5%. I think 5% was like the top that it got to, and it's actually
Yeah.
gone down since it was 5%.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So just give us a little bit of insight on like your personal experiences, like as like you said, you identified female at the beginning of your career. Like, can you give us
Mhm.
some of your experiences just navigating a very male dominated workspace?
Yeah, it sort of hit me out of nowhere. I don't know why I didn't realize that it was a male dominated industry when I got into it when I was a teenager. it wasn't something that occurred to me, and it was something that sort of bitch slapped me across the face when I got into school, and I was like, oh, I'm the only girl in my class. Okay, this is. I didn't think of it as a thing, but it was like, oh, that's strange. And then I think inevitably in the beginning it was harder because I was sort of naive. I was very young. When I was in school and still doing that sort of shadowing part of my career, I unfortunately did have a number of sexual assaults from sound techs, as well as a rape from a sound tech who was supposed to be mentoring me. And that was very discouraging. I didn't actually realize what had happened to me until years later when I went through it all in therapy. But I sort of still emotionally sort of felt beat down, and I almost left the industry at the time. But I pushed through it, and I'm very glad that I did. But even as I was getting started, like I remember being on bigger gigs and just having male coworkers sort of assume that I couldn't lift something, or I wasn't knowledgeable about whatever we were setting up. And to be fair, I was new, but I still knew enough to be qualified to have the position that I was in. And I did realize right off the get-go that I sort of have to work harder and prove myself at every possible gig. I mean, there were times when I'd be setting up for a show at one of the various venues that I was working at, and I would have band members come up to me as I'm running an XLR, be like, "Oh, are you a band member's girlfriend?" And I'm like, "No, I'm your sound tech, buddy." And we just, take it with a smile.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that I learned really early on, because I didn't really have any female mentors because there weren't many. I'd heard rumors of female sound techs, but I actually didn't meet one until like 4 or 5 years into my career. So it was sort of me figuring out how to deal with this weird, I don't even want to call it misogyny, because I don't think people were very conscious of it when they were sort of not expecting much from me. I think it was just, well, I've never worked with a female sound tech, so I don't know if she actually knows what she's doing. So I didn't really know how to handle that. And my approach to it was to give them the best experience possible with their first ever female sound tech. I'm like, if you've never had a female sound tech before, I want it to be good so that you expect better out of the next female sound tech that you encounter. I want to be positive. I want to have you have the best mix possible. I want you to come out of this being like, that was fucking awesome. Female sound techs can do sound. And I know that sounds so silly, but it really was my approach to it. And I 100%, I want to preface this by saying, I don't think that anyone should have to deal with some of the bullshit that I dealt with. Like, I don't think that you should just take the bullshit with a smile. I think if someone's being rude to you, you have absolutely every right to tell that person off and put them in their place.
Yeah.
But for me at the time, I knew that there weren't many female sound techs, and I didn't want them to just think of me as, quote, the bitch because I was being assertive. So it was a lot of sort of emotional and social dancing to get myself the reputation that I wanted and make it easier for the women coming after me. And that being said, I am sort of grateful for the male-dominated aspect of it as well, because it did actually really help me with my sort of gender journey. I was allowed to be more masked. I was allowed to be tougher around the edges and sort of grungier and dirtier and crass and all these things that I weren't really expected of me or allowed when I was younger. So in that, I did sort of discover another side of myself, and have since sort of balanced out. Because when I started in the industry, I was very femme. And then I had a bunch of sexual assaults and the rape. So I was like, I'm going to chop my hair off, and I'm going to dye it black, and I'm going to be super butch, and I'm going to like pretend to be gayer than I am so these guys will fuck off. And I became really, really hard and very masked and very crass. And then I sort of found my middle ground, where I really, truly do feel like myself now, and that is sort of landing on the non-binary sort of spectrum. So I am grateful for it in that way. But yeah, it was a colossal amount of bullshit to deal with in the beginning. And I gotta say, in the last 8 years, I've seen a really big shift, like just sort of industry wide in terms of the amount of allies and support that we're seeing now, and people really looking out for non-male techs and sort of techs who are in the minority in general. And not just like looking out for them, but also giving them a leg up, and that's fantastic. And there's a wonderful community online now. So I think really things have really shifted, but it was a lot to go through in the beginning. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really amazing to hear your story and see you succeed, even though you dealt with some absolutely horrific things. And I'm so proud of you that you've overcome all that, and you're just like to hear all that and like see the way that you operate is like it's inspiring that you're able to keep such a great attitude at work, carrying all of that. And I can't believe the pressure as well that you have to go through to you know work harder every single day of your life because you're trying to make a good experience just to be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
It's really awesome that you've been so successful. And I'm sorry, I'm a little like emotional right now. Like you're like really like I don't even think we've talked about a lot of this before. So we've talked like about it briefly, but not this in depth. So thank you so much for sharing that with me. Is there any I know you kind of gave some advice as you went along, but you mentioned there's like some like support and stuff available for people. Like where do you like discuss all this stuff, and is there like social media groups, or is there like I've seen a bunch of like panels and stuff at a lot of like industry events and everything. Where do you suggest anything to anyone who's kind of had a similar situation?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the biggest community I can think of right now for female or non-male tech specifically is just soundgirls.org on Facebook. Soundgirls.org on Facebook is fantastic. I think it's more of a global thing if I'm correct. There's a Soundgirls Toronto chapter for folks who are in Toronto specifically. But Soundgirls is a fantastic network they post articles, they post advice, they share stories. I've seen people pass gigs to one another. So it's a fantastic community in that regard. The Toronto chapter, if you are in Toronto, it's better, I think, to reach out to specific people. Some people even put themselves forward and be like, hey, if anyone is looking to shadow someone, I'm here, sort of thing. So I'm just feeling like the online community in general is good for folks who are sort of in the minority in the audio industry. But yeah, Soundgirls in particular stands out. And I know it's a very personal thing to offer, but it's something that I offer to all of my students, and like anyone who knows someone who might be looking for advice, I'm always like, reach out to me personally. Like I have no problem if someone is, needing specific advice in this regard, whether it be a non-male tech or someone in a minority or someone struggling with mental health in the industry. I'm more than happy to like connect with them on social media and like give them some advice personally. So feel free to like either link to my Facebook or Instagram profile, and I'm happy to talk with folks if they're looking for resources.
Very awesome. And I guess you noticed, you mentioned you noticed like a change in the industry. I've noticed the same thing, I guess like over 20 years ago when I started, the only women I saw were like theatrical stage managers. And then I saw like one or two, I don't even think I ever saw like a woman doing audio, but there was like one. I used to work with Styx quite often. They would come through almost every year at the theater I was working at, and Libby with Styx, who's the LD. she was like the only woman that I saw, like,
Yeah.
and then like now, like in like, I guess, our generation, in the past, like, maybe 5 or so years, I've started to see like a lot more, or no, more than that now. Sorry, the pandemic like makes you do weird math. But, like, I don't know, maybe since like, like the like 2010s maybe and on, like, I've seen, like riggers and like audio, like just like all of the things, but like it's still a minority, but they're there. And it's a step forward, at least.
I remember when I saw my first ever female sound tech, it was like spotting a fucking unicorn. I'd heard about her. I'm sure you know Keeks. Keeks, Karen Weingold, Keeks.
I'm horrible. I'm not really great with names, but
she's got blonde hair and some tattoos. She's a lovely gem of a human. Just like absolutely adore her. Fabulously talented front of house engineer. And I'd heard about her, and people were like, "Oh, you should reach out to Keeks. You should reach out to Keeks." And I was like, I've never met her. I have no idea who she is. And she literally ran through my stage on a way to another stage, and I was like, "Oh, you do exist!" It was like spotting a unicorn, and I think it took like a year or two after me even just spotting her to finally get her contact information and reach out to her and be like, "Dude, I need to pick your brain. I am alone here. Please help me." And she gave me some of the best advice that I've ever been given, and it was just so nice to just finally have someone to bond with in that regard. But now I'm just seeing more and more the amount of women or non-male techs getting into the industry is like really climbing. But I feel like one thing I wanted to mention is you had mentioned like, to look at the industry from afar, you see female engineers and you female producers, but it's not quite 50-50, even though it might seem like that from the outside. And my comment on that was you will often see female non-binary technicians or engineers, as well as people of color or queer people, sort of, if you're from the outside looking in, because I think that often those people are doing what I'm doing or what I did to survive, which was working extra hard, just like being better than your white male counterpart, because if you're not better, then you're not as good as them. So you'll find that they work the hardest. And, if you ever have a female tech on a crew who is of some experience, you can bet your ass that she is working harder than her male counterpart.
Yes. I agree with that 100%. And I see it. What Guillermo mentioned something yesterday that kind of ties into this. We were talking about like grant writing and stuff and the grant process, and he kind of mentioned that like I'm kind of paraphrasing him here, but that if you get a grant and you like it and grants are readily available, it kind of like takes away the necessity of doing something, like having that financial foothold kind of stunts maybe the creative process or something like that. So it kind of ties in to this a little bit, in that like if you don't have that foothold, you have to work extra hard. You know what I mean? Female and non-male techs, are succeeding, but it's because partly they have to work so hard.
Absolutely. I've seen that 100%, and I'm sort of, like I said, I'm sort of grateful for that aspect of it, because I don't think I would have had that upward trajectory that you talked about if I hadn't been driven to just always be doing better. I mean, I'm a driven person to begin with, but then,
it's like that drive and then like overdrive,
Yeah.
100%. To put it in guitar pedal terms.
But I have to say, I say to a lot of my students these days, because I talk about the sort of inequality and the male dominated part of the industry, I'm like, but I've been seeing in recent years it is absolutely a benefit to be not a straight cis het white dude, because I have clients, whether it be a band or an entire festival or a show or whatever it might be, I have people coming to me being like, I want a woman, or I want a queer person, or I want a trans person, or I want an indigenous person, or I want a black person, because this is what the client needs. This is what the client wants in terms of the type of people they're hiring. And I'm seeing that, and it might be someone trying to check the diversity checkbox, but I've often heard specifically for non-male techs, on tours specifically, it's a vibe. They're like, throwing a woman onto on an all-male tour changes the vibe on the bus, or it changes the vibe on stage, and it really does benefit people. I don't personally know how, because I haven't seen what it's like without me there, but I have heard from many people that people
it
are
sucks. If you're not on a gig, it sucks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was gonna say, what's the energy like? Like, is it brotastic?
Yeah, for sure. Like if there's like no doubt about it, when like it's just a bunch of dudes together, it's like the vibe is so much different.
Yeah.
It's yes, 100% is what. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I just don't know. I see all these people requesting this, and I'm like, what is the vibe when it is not this? So yeah.
But also just like the vibe, yes. But I remember just thinking about chatting with you today. I started thinking about some past experiences and things, and some things that I've felt. And one of the things that stood out for me, and I brought it up a little bit earlier, but I want to expand on it a little bit, was Libby, who's the LD for Styx. Seeing her show was incredible. Just first off, personally, like everything you said about being thick-skinned and everything, she was that. She's a commanding person, and she's damn good at her job. But the way the show looked, I'd never seen I'd never seen it in rock and roll, like in music. I've seen things like that when you go to theater, and there's they just use some different lighting techniques and stuff. But when I saw her show, it was pastel-y and soft, and like when you go to a rock show, it's like blue and red and purple and white, and it's like, and like purple is blue and red, so you really got two things going on. But in her design and her application, it just expanded everything, and like it brought mood and feeling, and just like they say that like men don't really see color that well, so to see like a woman do it, it was like it clicked. I'm like, holy shit, man, like this is unreal.
The approach is entirely different.
And if you can ever see Styx, I'm not sure if Libby is still with them, but they tour with an entire like incandescent rig, so it's all old par cans and stuff. They got some movers and stuff, but like all the wash is par cans and cool. and gels, and that's the way she mixes those colors is unreal.
That's so cool. I want to look up some photos of the Libby days then. Yeah,
and just like the way it vibes, the way the scenes change, like she brought like a whole theatrical approach to a rock show. I don't know if she has a theatrical background or not, but like it would make sense if she did.
Yeah, and I sort of like, and I love when folks do that and they have those sort of alternative approaches to it, and I very much found myself doing stuff like that in regards to monitors, where I was building more of a user experience, and I was in regards to in-ears, I was building virtual space back in to people's ears to make it feel comfy and natural again. And it's sort of an approach that a lot of the artists that I was working with at the time hadn't experienced, and the response to it, not just emotionally, but in regards to their performance, was just drastic. Night and day for some people. So yeah, it's interesting seeing different folks having a very different approach to it, maybe, but based on just who they are as a person. But yeah, I definitely broke a lot of the rules that the technicians told me not to do when I was starting out in monitors, because I got my first monitor gig and I was like, guys, I need tips. I've never done monitors before. And people were like, don't do this and don't do that and don't do this. And like, as like a year or two progressed, I'm like, I'm going to just go do those things that people told me not to do, because this feels like a better choice.
Yeah.
And then it ended up working out.
Yeah. As someone who's known you for so long, I just couldn't imagine you breaking any rules or anything. I'm just going over my notes here. Let's talk about spaces, because I really enjoy talking about different venues, different applications. I read an article a long time ago from David Byrne, and he's from the Talking Heads, and he was talking about different applications in different spaces of music, and he talked about how like why certain bands are so successful on a large scale, and he just talked about the sounds that, say, like U2 produces, which works amazing in like a large stadium or like outdoor environment, or like environment where it's like boomy and echoey, and then he started talking about like like punk rock and small rooms and stuff like that. So I always love asking people, like, what's your favorite venue? Where do you like working? What just makes you feel all those like music feels that, like, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about this right now. I don't know if you can see on the camera, but it's totally goosebumpy. Oh yeah, your camera's over there. But yeah, like what do you like? Where do you like to work?
I mean, that's so hard too, because you would think, and I was joking the other day about being a slutty technician, and that like I have mixed many bands, but not worked exclusively for many.
Yeah. Which is like a very solid piece of advice to everybody. It's like, you have to be a slutty technician to make it. Like, if you're not, like, at some point in your career, if you're not saying yes to everybody and working every gig you can, you're not going to find success at all.
It's true. It's true. And I definitely went through that phase. And I was joking. I was like, the peak of my yes phase, where I was like double, triple gigging it some days. Yeah. I did the math, and I was like, I'm averaging 800 to 1,000 bands a year, which is nutty. Yeah. But then I've like the amount of bands that I've just worked for solo as like their monitor engineer or their front of house tech is just very different. Yeah. But yeah, and I think the same thing goes for venues for me. I don't get out much. Yeah. I don't get out to see shows much, and I don't get out to mix a variety of venues. Like, I've mixed certainly at a handful of the core ones in Toronto. I did really love the Mod Club, not necessarily always for front of house, but I did love the vibe there, just in terms of like, the production value was decent. Yes. The capacity was smaller, so it always was just like packed. So the energy was always really up. I had a fantastic tech team and manager who always really took care of us. So I mean, in that regard, in terms of just enjoying working somewhere, I really did enjoy my Mod Club days. Crazy stories that came out of that place, but I think just in terms of pure enjoyment, I really loved working at the Mod Club when it was still around.
I really enjoyed the Mod Club too. It's a great venue. We worked together there. And when I was with the Canadian Indie Week, we'd come in there for like a week every year. And I always felt a strong connection there, because like usually when I'm working at these clubs, it's just for like a day and I'm gone, and then I'm on to the next one, and then but it's cool to go into a space for like, we weren't there for the whole week. I think it was just like the headlining bits at the end, but I was always in there for like 2 to 3 days, and getting to work with you and getting to work with your team. Like Eric was always really super awesome. I liked him a lot. And George, the manager there.
Yeah.
And I guess Bruno's the owner. I believe.
Bruno's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
owner,
So I've also worked with Bruno at his other venue, but like just such a great team and such a great vibe. Everyone was super welcoming, and yeah, like you said, like it's small enough, it's big enough to get some really cool artists in, and it's small enough that it's fun and energy packed, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I always felt at home there when I went there.
Same.
I even think my like Facebook banner for a while was "Stay Human" from Stage Right at the Mod Club.
Yes, I think that was Stecky.
I think it was too. Yeah.
Yeah, Stecky put up a bunch of different cute things like that around. It's like stay human, and we had little like heartwarming sort of stickies all over the venue, just reminding people to be good humans, and we're gonna get through this gig.
Yeah, and that was always the vibe, man. Like it was really cool to go in there, and it's a fucking shame that place is not there anymore. Has someone else moved in there and done something?
It's called the IATSE Club now. It is an entirely different owner and manager. Everything is very different. It's very different. I think I did like 2 or 3 gigs there as Axis, and I'm like, I can't do it. My heart's just not there. It's like it's the same building, but the heart is sort of gone in terms of like the old Mod Squad days. Yeah,
I've been through similar things where like working in the casinos. The management was like very high turnover on management. Like it was like seemed to go in like very short like cycles where like they would bring in a new like director, and then like all the middle management would change, and it would just completely change the vibe of where you were working.
Yeah, the structure of the whole venue is really shifted just in terms of both production and behind the bar and management. Like everything is very, very different. Yeah, so it's not the same place at all. Yeah. Well, the Mod Club days were good. I loved it in that like it was still like a decently high production venue, but it had that like, I don't know, rock bar sort of like things would get really sweaty and really dirty, and it still felt very like rock and roll.
It was.
And I loved that about the venue.
Yeah. I always enjoyed, like, even if it's just like a place I'm going out to, like a bar or something, I just appreciate like a bit of grime. Like if I'm at some place and it's like spotless and like, it's like I just feel like I'm like not welcome there. But if there's like a bit of grime everywhere, like you go into the bathroom and like there's some like little black stuff in the corner, and like some like stickers everywhere. Like I love that shit.
Yeah, I agree. And the Mod Club was like, it had a good balance of both.
It did. Yeah, because like when I did Indie Week there, we had like, up in the top like balcony section there, we had like we set up like a really nice like VIP area and everything, and it was kind of like a cool little hangout spot, and it looked really nice and well put together, and then you could go downstairs and get sweaty.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah. So I want to chat a little bit more. I like to talk about we talk a lot about like our past and what we've done and what we're doing, but like also like looking into the future, and maybe you can tie in like your future and what you're doing, like transitioning into like maybe theater, who knows, but and can you just touch on a little bit, you've mentioned that music was a little bit exhausting maybe, and like it's a lot, and like the doing like working the clubs was like maybe a thing in your like 20s when you weren't didn't have any like other responsibilities, or you like didn't want to just stay up until 2 a.m. doing a show. Like give us a little rundown of like the difference between like I guess like work-life balance and like between the music industry and theater, and then we'll get into like where we think the future of like being a technician is going and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it really does depend on the scale of venue that you're working on. Like I remember, so I was the senior audio tech at the Piston for a number of years,
Yeah.
which was fantastic. Honestly,
Great little
for such a
room.
little venue, it was such an amazing
Great
sounding
little
room.
room.
Not fancy at all, just really fantastic sounding room. I was just so proud of so many mixes that came out of there.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely love the space. But those were like a 6 or 7 p.m. call, right? So I would still be able to do a gig in the morning or afternoon and work that. So my work-life balance then was sort of non-existent. I was doing double, triple gigs when I was doing that. And again, I was coming home at 1 or 2 in the morning, depending. But I loved it. And when you sort of bump up in scale, your work-life balance is still not so great, but a little bit better because you're working places like the Mod or Danforth or what have you, those sort of medium to large scale venues. Your call times can be anywhere from like noon to 2-ish on average. So, it's getting a bit better there. Depending on the night, you could finish at 11, you could finish at 3, depends on the evening, right? So it really did it does shift as you sort of go up in scale. And then, in terms of sort of work-life balance with theater now, it's very different. I'm still sort of getting used to it. It feels very strange. I feel like a noob all over again with theater because meanwhile, like I've been doing sound for 14 years, but I walked into not just working as a 58 permit worker, but just theater in general. I'm like, I feel so out of my element here. It's just a totally different way of operating as a technician. The sort of everything's very separated in terms of departments. There's different names for certain things, but but then also like the work-life balance of it, like rehearsal weeks and setup weeks were 14-hour days, and it was 6 days a week, 14-hour days, and I was just absolutely dead during those first few weeks. And then we get into shows, and my show weeks are anywhere between a 26-hour week and a 40-hour week, and I'm paid well enough that I don't need to work other gigs. And that really is a big shift for me, is not only just the pay jump for working in the union with Local 58, but also
which has all kinds of benefits just on its own.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But also like post-pandemic pay shift really has shifted a lot. But in terms of working in theater, I have regular hours, which never happened before. I have the same 8 shows every week, and I can depend on a paycheck, and I know exactly when I'm working, and that's sort of lovely. Especially now that I have a kid. So the pandemic really did change a lot for me. Like a lot of us realized that we were overworking ourselves and just absolutely not just killing our social life and the emotional sort of social side of ourselves, but physically, like we were really beating ourselves up for gigs. And, there's a lot of dopamine and a lot of reward and a lot of love that we have for our work. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of us realized that it was taking too much from ourselves.
Yes.
And so I really think that the post-pandemic mental shift of taking care of ourselves a little bit better, not totally destroying ourselves with work. I myself gave myself a heart condition at the age of 27 because I was working too much. I don't want to do that. I don't want to live a little bit longer, and I don't want to give my whole self to this sort of overworking capitalist mentality. And so post-pandemic me is happy with the low theater hours and the better pay. And even outside of theater, better pay in general is just something that exists for us now because the industry is so short on technicians, because many of us said, I don't want to do that anymore. And a lot of really good people left.
Yeah.
And I had it right too, but I do miss them, and I think the industry is sort of hurting with it.
There definitely was a huge mass exodus of some very talented technicians and people from all over the map when it comes to music industry folks. It just became something we couldn't do, and and then people just out of necessity had to find other options. And when you get into something else, like I know a lot of people maybe went to film,
Mhm.
and a lot of people just found other careers like maybe adjacent to entertainment, or just something completely different. uh, you kind of get into this mode of like, oh, like this is like the 9 to 5 thing, and I have weekends off, and like I can, like, I can eat dinner at home every night, and it's just like these things that like I've never experienced.
Mhm.
So like, yeah, there was a mass exodus, and some came back, but like a lot of people didn't, and it's a different landscape out there now, and a different just a different way of doing things. I've found, like I've really struggled doing shows. I've actually kind of taken not a full hiatus, but uh, 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 I would say over like around 90% of the industry work I've done in the past year. It's been around 10% of what I would normally do.
Wow.
And I needed to take a break. Like you said, you're working long hours and stuff. My last project that really made me reassess things. I was on the road for 8 months, and I had about 4 days off.
Oh my
Um, I might have had like, a day off here and there in between it all, but that day off and those 4 days off that I had, I was the production manager on a huge tour. It wasn't really a
God.
tour. It was like we were touring, but it was just different. We were doing permanent installations.
Mhm.
Um, but the burnout that I had at the end of it, I remember I was in Denver, Colorado, and I woke up not feeling great. So this is right in the middle of the pandemic, and so I got a COVID test. I got COVID, and like it hit me really hard. It was really shitty. Like I went to the hospital because I couldn't breathe. My heart rate was like through the roof, and like
Wow.
the nurse didn't even, like, she was like, we're gonna take your blood pressure again later because it's crazy. So like I kind of like, okay, I need to like calm down. So I did some like breathing exercises and stuff, and I kind of calmed myself down. And then so I go back to my hotel room after uh, being at the hospital, and I can't breathe. Like they gave me an inhaler that I had to take. All I can muster doing is like going to bed. Like I called my boss, and I was like, here's the deal. I have COVID. I need some time off. Can you like let people know? And he was super supportive. I really love I really love him. He just treated me so fairly through everything. But everything else, like my phone didn't stop ringing while I was
Mhm.
in bed with COVID, and it's like I always put 100% of myself into any show I'm doing. So like I have to answer that phone, like when someone calls about something, like I have to pick it up, and like I have to help them out. I want to get the show up and going still,
Yeah.
Um, so like the 4 days off I had, um, and having COVID and not being able to go into work at the end, like it was just complete burnout, complete and utter burnout. I can't even tell people how COVID was, because I didn't know how much of it was burnout and how much of it was COVID. Like you
Absolutely.
can get really, really burnt out on the industry. And I think post pandemic, I think a lot of people are like really mindful about, doing these crazy gigs. Like I was on the Juno Awards, and,
Mm.
like it was a long shift, and like a lot of the crew was just like, no, I don't want to work overtime. And they left. And I'm like, oh, okay. So like this is what it's like now. And I'm like, it sucked because like, like things didn't go as planned. But like the part of me that's like, like I've always kind of been pro labor movement and everything, and like, like workers' rights, and like it's so working as a manager and like having that philosophy is sometimes very, very difficult. But like it's just the way the industry is working now, and like I think it's a great thing, and I hope that like the planning that goes into these things can necessitate like accommodate people who want to work like an 8-hour day, or like even part-time, like a 4-hour day or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something I've had a really difficult time explaining to people who aren't in the industry, is just the sort of like level of intensity that is there for us, and that sort of drive to get the gig done no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I see that extended in you when you were taking your days off with COVID. You were, even if you're a normal human doing insane hours on a gig, the moment you stop working, your body just sort of collapses and you have a bit of a burnout anyway. Yeah. I mean, I had it with my 14-hour rehearsal week, and then my day off. I had a half day off, not even a full day off. And that half day, my body just collapsed and I felt like utter garbage. But then on top of that, you had COVID. So burnout is already such a normalized thing that we should sort of expect not only ourselves, but other people to sort of push through working extreme hours for the sake of the gig, and kill yourself physically and mentally for the sake of the gig. Mm-hmm. And that's just, that sort of mentality is sort of dying. And I'm glad that it's dying, but it also is hard because the way we have currently structured schedules and structured the planning for gigs is based off our old mentality of work yourself to death and get her done. Yes. It hasn't really accommodated more breaks or more people doing shift work instead of working a 14+ hour day. So now, I think a lot of that's changing, but it's hard.
Yeah, the industry definitely needs to play catch up on this like new, I guess. Well, I don't even know what's the word to describe it. New like philosophy of workers, but this goes back to about 2015, and this is pre-pandemic. On some larger shows, I've noticed what you're saying is like shift work, where like there'll be 2 production managers, or there'll be, and and like when I did the Asian Games ceremonies, it's such a huge production. We were working on that. I was there for just shy of a year working on that. And not only did I have like a kind of counterpart that would work shift work with me, I had a team that was also working shift work. And like there was, I think out of that whole time, there were key points where we had to be operational 24 hours to make things work. So like the build up to the opening ceremonies, and the switch over between opening and closing ceremonies, and then closing ceremonies, and then the load out. Like those key points, we had to have 24-hour access of the stadium for workers and all the things coming through. And we did have shift work, so it can be done. Like there's people in the industry who have scheduled things like this, but like I think like that's a massive project with a massive budget, right? Like I think the like rest of the industry has to kind of like take a look at those kind of structures and play some catch up and start doing things like that, because there's no reason that a show's success or a show's like schedule or budget should fall on one person. If like a production manager of like a tour gets sick, it is devastating, or or if like the audio engineer gets sick, it's you're flying in somebody from maybe across the country to like, step in to like help out. There needs to be more staffing around. How that's going to happen, I don't really know, like, because the budget lines on these shows are so like razor thin.
I know. Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things that I've seen sort of stopping that is budget.
Yes.
And I don't, because I'm only involved on the technical side of things and not at all on the planning or logistical side of things. I don't know what that solution looks like.
Yeah.
On either a
they're
large scale.
really tough conversations to have. I've dealt with being a production manager and tour manager. Like that's a large portion of my job is to have conversations with artist managers and venues, and try to figure a budget. And it's like the first thing to get cut is always labor. It's always the first discussion to have, because people see it, and it is a big line item on a budget sheet. Labor isn't cheap, even if it's like cheap labor. Like if you're using like a labor company that like doesn't charge as much as say like IATSE does, it's still like the largest budget line on a show. So people see it and they're like, no, get it down, But like they're and it's just it's a constant conversation. And like I said, like being responsible for staffing and being responsible for budget and being like being someone with a philosophy of like pro labor movement is like a super tough position to be in, because you're just constantly fighting for something to happen. Like it's at the I used to work at a very large theater in Toronto as a production manager. So I would constantly have tours come in. And in the advance, I'd be like, yeah, you want to do this? Okay, great. And I would do the advance with them. And part of that advance is giving them the labor quote and the labor budget. And I've had, it's always like cut it. And then the show comes, and then people run into like meal penalties and all sorts of things because they've cut that staffing budget back down. And now, you haven't been able to get it done on time. So now the audio tech has to stay through dinner time at double his rate, or double their rate. So I'm sorry. That's such a fucking thing, but double the rate. And it just blows the budget out of the water. And I've had people in my office, like settling a show with them, in tears. Like I've had a promoter in tears because it was like busting him. He lost his shirt that night. And you try to have these conversations and be like, you can't run on this crew for what you're trying to do. It's like, cut the video wall, use a projection screen, and we can get this done in 8 hours with 10 crew, but if you want that LED wall in, it's going to cost you at least an extra 4 people, and it's going to take those 4 people 8 hours to get that wall up, functioning, ready to go for the show. But it's so far and few between where people actually heed your advice from the beginning, just because that budget line on there is the biggest. So they're like, fuck it, no way, and it's such a hard conversation to have. And, I really hope the industry catches up with people's mentality and philosophies.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's going to be a slow process, but a necessary one post-pandemic, because we're so short on techs and qualified techs at that. It's going to be a painful transition, but it is a necessary one.
So sure. We're running out of time, but speaking of qualified techs, we haven't talked about in depth anyways about the Harris Institute. You went to school there? You're teaching
did.
there now? It's like full
Yeah.
circle thing?
Yeah, and it was a bit surreal, and I still have a bit of imposter syndrome teaching there.
No, don't.
I do.
You're
I feel like a noob every day. I have a fantastic group of students right now, like some of the brightest collective group of students that I've ever had, to the point where
awesome.
like they ask so many good questions that I can't actually get all of the content out every class, which is just fantastic.
That's
Like it's a
great.
good problem to have. But yeah, I feel like Harris was probably one of the best decisions of my life. And I know that I can come from a very biased place, but the connections that I had from Harris have been sort of like life changing for me. The instructors that I have, the advice that I got while I was there, and then further from that, the amount of Harris grads that I bump into on gigs is just constant. I've met more Harris grads than any other school combined.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel like that was a good choice for me. And since sort of going there as an instructor now is fantastic. I teach because I really value all the people who mentored me when I was sort of coming up in the industry, and I feel like it's sort of my duty to pass that on. I want to be that mentor. I want to be that support. I want to be that shift for someone. And so teaching is that for me. And I've been lucky enough to have full range over how I'm teaching, around the content that I'm teaching. I approach my class in a very different way. I structure it for all different learning styles, for people who are better with practical or better with written,
Yep.
or I even structure it that attendance and participation is a good chunk of their mark in case people get really anxious on their exam and totally flop. Then I can at least be like, no, they showed up to class. I could see in class when they were on the console, they really got these concepts. Mm-hmm. They're in it. They get it. I think that is worth a pass, sort of thing. And then I also do an intake sort of bit of information for every student before we start our first class. And I get their name, their age, their pronouns, their personal strengths and weaknesses, their technical strengths and weaknesses, what they want to do when they graduate, and then if they have any mental or physical disabilities or illnesses that are going to impact their learning. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, really crucial, because if I know that someone can't stand for long periods of time to be around the console, then I'll accommodate that. If I know that someone has social anxiety and can't put up their hand in class or doesn't feel comfortable operating the console in front of other people, I'll offer that student out of class time on my own time to make sure that they have an equal opportunity. Someone has depression and can't get out of bed. Cool. Like, I'm going to let you have that day off, but we're going to work to catch you up outside of class. It doesn't mean giving people sort of a free pass, but it does mean sort of giving everyone equal access.
Yeah.
And the response from the students have just been amazing. And the retention of information rather than a regurgitation of information has been really good. And it's just such an absolutely rewarding but also very humbling experience, because there are certainly, I mean, especially with this group, but in general, inevitably they ask you questions where you're like, I have never had to think about that before. Like, what does this random combination of things do? And I'm like, I've never done that. Let's find out together. Yeah. Sort of. So I'm learning so much from teaching.
Yeah. First off, what you're saying about your class, it seems amazing. Learning is such a it's such a spectrum when it comes to like the way people learn, and the way that like having different people in one setting that all learn a different way, like being inclusive like that is like such a huge part of the education process. It like, to me, it sounds like you are like the perfect person to be in a setting like that. You know, both your technical knowledge and your skills with understanding people and understanding their needs. I can't think of a better teacher, and just super proud of you for being there and doing it.
Fun.
We are running out of time though. We'll do a little like post thing after, and we'll get all of your information to like put on the screen and everything. But is there anything you want to say before you go? Anything you want to touch on?
I think we've covered a lot.
We
I
did
mean,
cover a lot.
yeah, I think overall I'm just really hopeful for the future of just our industry in general. I feel like it's night and day from when I started. It's more diversity, it's more support, it's better mentors, it's better working conditions, better pay. Everything just seems to be working to be less shitty and just like more just in general, like I feel like it's more livable. Like I feel like it's not an industry that is built to just work you until you can't work anymore. It is really supporting folks.
Yeah.
I'm both excited to see where I'm going to land because I'm not entirely sure at this point. I think I'm still happy to continue mixing monitors, but I also am enjoying this theater thing, so I think I'm going to give that a try as well. Although I'm surprisingly I've been sort of surprised by my interaction with Local 58 thus far, because it for me, I was very hesitant for a very long time because everyone said it's a bunch of grumpy old crusty guys and it's a lot of really strict rules and grumble.
It's
And
changing.
I got into it, and I mean I know that I'm very lucky that I got landed at the Princess of Wales, because Wayne, who's head of audio, and Wade, who is my A1, they're both just like absolute sweethearts, very knowledgeable, very calm, have been so patient with me and
Great.
teaching me everything I need to know. So I've been very, very fortunate that was sort of my introduction to it. But yeah, it's very nice having breaks and pay, and that's
awesome.
not something I'm used to. So
yeah, it's definitely an interesting time to be in this industry, and I'm sure wherever you land in the future, whether it's doing shows or theater or teaching, you'll be very successful at it just because you work so hard and you're so talented. Thank you so much for taking the time and chatting with me. I know you've got so much going on. I love you lots, and thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
You're watching the Hostile Takeover podcast.